The alarm clock's shrill beep pierced through the silence at exactly 6:47 a.m., just as it had every morning for the past 3 years. Ethan Matthews rolled over, his body tensing at the sound that seemed to drill directly into his brain. He counted the beeps, 7, 8, 9, before reaching over to silence it. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful, it was loaded with the weight of another day he'd have to navigate. Ethan sat up in bed, his feet finding the familiar worn patch on the carpet beside his bed. The texture was smoother there, comforting. He pressed his toes into it, feeling the slight give of the compressed fibers. His mother had suggested getting new carpet, but Ethan had nearly had a meltdown at the thought. This patch was his anchor, his starting point for each day. The routine began exactly as it always did. Shower for exactly 8 minutes, long enough to feel clean, short enough to avoid the water pressure becoming overwhelming. The soap had to be the same brand, the same scent. When his mother had accidentally bought a different kind last month, Ethan had been unable to shower for 3 days until she could get the right one. Breakfast was toast cut diagonally with exactly 2 tablespoons of strawberry jam spread evenly to the edges, orange juice in the blue cup, never the red one. The blue cup had the right weight in his hand, the right feel against his lips. These weren't preferences, they were necessities, invisible requirements that kept his world from tilting off its axis. "Ethan, honey, you need to hurry up," his mother called from the kitchen. "The bus comes in 20 minutes. 20 minutes. Ethan's stomach clenched. He'd been eating for 12 minutes, which meant he had exactly 5 minutes to brush his teeth, 3 minutes to get dressed, and they'd reach the bus stop with 30 seconds to spare. But what if the bus was early? What if there was traffic? What if... "Ethan," his mother's voice was gentler now, the tone she used when she sensed his anxiety climbing. "Everything's going to be fine, just like every other day." But that was the problem. Every other day had been a carefully choreographed dance of survival, and Ethan was tired of dancing. The yellow school bus rumbled to life as Ethan climbed aboard, his backpack clutched tightly to his chest. The driver, Mrs. Peterson, gave him a kind smile and a small wave, the same greeting every morning. Ethan nodded back, unable to meet her eyes but appreciating the consistency of her kindness. The bus was a sensory assault. 37 students talking at once, the squeak of vinyl seats, the smell of diesel fuel mixing with leftover lunch odors and teenage body spray. Ethan made his way to his usual seat, 3rd row, right side, by the window. The window was his escape, a barrier between him and the chaos behind him. "Hey, weird boy," came a voice from across the aisle. Tyler Henderson, a boy from his grade who seemed to derive pleasure from making others uncomfortable. "Still sitting by yourself? Don't you have any friends?" Ethan stared out the window, watching the familiar houses blur past. He'd memorized every mailbox, every tree, every crack in the sidewalk along this route. The predictability was soothing, unlike the unpredictability of Tyler's taunts. "I'm talking to you," Tyler pressed, his voice louder now. "Why don't you ever talk to anyone? Are you stupid or something?" The word stupid hit Ethan like a physical blow. He wasn't stupid. He had read every book in the school library about astronomy, could recite the periodic table from memory, and understood complex mathematical concepts that even some high school students struggled with. But he couldn't explain this to Tyler, couldn't make him understand that intelligence came in different forms. "Leave him alone, Tyler." The voice belonged to Maya Chen, a girl from his math class. Ethan had noticed her before. She was always kind to everyone, never joining in when others laughed at something cruel. "He's not bothering you. I'm just trying to be friendly," Tyler said with mock innocence. Maybe if he acted normal, people would actually want to talk to him. Normal. The word echoed in Ethan's mind as the bus pulled into the school parking lot. What was normal? Was it laughing at jokes he didn't find funny? Was it making small talk about things that didn't matter? Was it pretending that the fluorescent lights didn't make his skin crawl and that the sound of the lunch bell didn't make him want to cover his ears and rock back and forth? As students filed off the bus, Ethan remained seated for a moment, staring at his reflection in the window. He looked normal. Brown hair, brown eyes, average height for a 15-year-old. But behind those eyes was a brain that processed the world differently, that found patterns where others saw chaos, that felt emotions so intensely they sometimes threatened to overwhelm him completely. He stood up, adjusted his backpack, and stepped off the bus into another day of pretending to be something he wasn't. Jefferson High School was a maze of lockers, classrooms, and social hierarchies that Ethan had never quite learned to navigate. He'd memorized the layout within his first week, could find any classroom with his eyes closed, but the social map remained as foreign to him as a language he'd never learned. His first class was advanced mathematics with Mr. Rodriguez, one of the few teachers who seemed to understand that Ethan's silence didn't mean he wasn't listening. In math, there were rules, formulas, logical progressions that made sense. Numbers didn't lie, didn't change their meaning based on tone of voice or facial expression. Today we're going to work on calculus derivatives, Mr. Rodriguez announced, turning to write on the whiteboard. The markers squeaked against the surface, a sound that made Ethan's teeth ache, but he forced himself to focus on the equations taking shape. Within minutes, Ethan had solved the first 3 problems in his head, but when Mr. Rodriguez asked for volunteers to work through the solutions on the board, Ethan remained silent. Standing in front of the class, feeling all those eyes on him, was a special kind of torture. His body would freeze, his mind would go blank, and the numbers that came so easily to him in private would scatter like leaves in the wind. "Ethan?" Mr. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but expectant. "Would you like to show us how you solved number 4? Ethan's hands began to shake. He could feel the weight of 25 pairs of eyes turning toward him, could hear the subtle shifts in posture, the barely audible whispers. His throat closed up and he shook his head quickly, staring down at his desk. "That's okay," Mr. Rodriguez said smoothly, moving on to another student. But Ethan caught the look of disappointment that flickered across his teacher's face, and it felt like a knife in his chest. The rest of the class passed in a blur of equations and explanations that Ethan already understood. When the bell rang, he was the first one out of his seat, hurrying toward the door before anyone could try to talk to him. But as he reached the hallway, he heard Tyler's voice behind him. "Nice job, Einstein. Way to show off how smart you are." Ethan quickened his pace, but Tyler's words followed him down the hallway. The sarcasm was clear, but beneath it was something else, a genuine confusion about why someone who was obviously intelligent would choose to remain silent. Ethan wished he could explain that it wasn't a choice, that his brain simply worked differently, that the same mind that could solve complex equations could be completely paralyzed by the thought of speaking in front of others. The cafeteria was Ethan's least favorite place in the entire school. The cacophony of voices, the clatter of trays, the smell of industrial food, and the complex social dynamics all combined to create a perfect storm of sensory overload. He'd learned to survive it by claiming the same table every day, a small round table in the corner where he could sit with his back to the wall and observe without being the center of attention. Today, as he unwrapped his lunch, the same sandwich he'd been eating for 3 years, turkey, no cheese, no condiments, on white bread with the crusts cut off, he noticed Maya Chen approaching his table. His stomach clenched with anxiety. Changes to his routine were difficult enough, but unexpected social interactions were particularly challenging. "Hi," Maya said, stopping beside his table. "I'm Maya. We're in math class together." Ethan nodded, unsure of what was expected of him. He knew who she was, of course. He knew who everyone was, had catalogued their names, their usual seats, their basic patterns. But knowing someone and talking to them were entirely different things. "Would it be okay if I sat here?" she asked, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "My usual table is full today." Ethan wanted to say no. He wanted to explain that this was his table, his routine, his safe space. But he also didn't want to be rude, and Maya had defended him on the bus. So he nodded, his hands gripping his sandwich a little tighter. Maya sat down and unwrapped her own lunch, an elaborate salad with vegetables Ethan couldn't identify and a dressing that smelled too strong. She ate quietly for a moment, seemingly comfortable with the silence, which surprised Ethan. Most people felt the need to fill silence with meaningless chatter. "You're really good at math," Maya said finally. "I saw you finish those problems before Mr. Rodriguez even finished explaining them." Ethan felt his face grow warm. Compliments were almost as difficult to handle as criticism. He didn't know how to respond, so he took another bite of his sandwich. I struggle with it sometimes, Maya continued. Not the basic stuff, but when it gets really complex, I just freeze up. Does that ever happen to you? Ethan looked up at her, surprised by the question. Maya was looking at him with genuine curiosity, not the pitying look he was used to receiving, not the impatient expression that said, hurry up and respond normally. Not with math, he said quietly, his voice barely audible above the cafeteria noise. With other things. It was the first real conversation he'd had with a peer in months, and while it terrified him, there was something about Maya's calm presence that made it feel slightly less overwhelming. The afternoon was going relatively well until third period English class, when everything went wrong at once. Mrs. Patterson had rearranged the desks into small groups for a collaborative discussion about the book they were reading. Ethan found himself separated from his usual spot by the window, squeezed between two classmates he rarely spoke to, facing three others who were all talking at once. "So what do you think the symbolism of the green light means?" asked Jessica, a girl who always seemed to have the right answer for everything. Ethan knew the answer. He'd read The Great Gatsby 3 times, and had written detailed notes about the symbolism, the themes, the literary devices. But sitting here, surrounded by faces turned expectantly toward him, the words stuck in his throat. "Come on, Ethan," said Derek, one of his group members. "You must have some thoughts about it." The fluorescent lights seemed to be flickering more than usual, creating a strobe effect that made Ethan's skin crawl. Someone was tapping their pen against their desk. Tap, tap, tap. A rhythm that seemed to bore directly into his skull. The combined smell of different perfumes and deodorants was making him nauseous. Ethan started, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "I think it represents..." But Jessica had already moved on, turning to Derek with an animated explanation of her interpretation. The conversation flowed around Ethan like water around a stone, and he sat there feeling invisible and overwhelmed at the same time. The pen tapping got louder, the lights seemed brighter, someone laughed, a sharp, piercing sound that made Ethan flinch. He could feel his carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. "Are you okay?" asked Sarah, the girl sitting next to him. "You look really pale." The question was meant to be kind, but it drew everyone's attention to him. 6 pairs of eyes were suddenly focused on his face, studying him, analyzing him. Ethan felt trapped, like an animal in a cage being observed by curious visitors. "I'm fine," he managed to say, but his voice was strained, unnatural. The pen tapping continued. Tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to be getting louder, more insistent. Ethan looked around the room, trying to identify the source, but everyone seemed to be holding their pens, clicking them, tapping them against various surfaces. The sound was everywhere, all at once. "Ethan?" Mrs. Patterson's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Do you need to step outside?" The room fell silent, except for the humming of the fluorescent lights and the distant sound of a lawnmower outside. But it was too late. The careful balance Ethan maintained every day, the delicate equilibrium that allowed him to function in a world that wasn't designed for his brain, had been shattered. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with a sound that made several students wince. His hands were shaking, his breathing was rapid and shallow, and he felt like the walls were closing in around him. "I need to go," he said, his voice barely controlled. "I need to go, now." Without waiting for permission, Ethan grabbed his backpack and walked quickly toward the door. Behind him, he could hear the murmur of voices, the sound of his classmates discussing what had just happened, probably wondering what was wrong with him. He made it to the hallway before the tears started. The guidance counselor's office was quiet, dimly lit, and mercifully free of the overwhelming stimuli that had triggered Ethan's meltdown. Mrs. Williams, the counselor, had been working with autistic students for over a decade and knew exactly what Ethan needed: space, time, and no pressure to explain himself until he was ready. Ethan sat in the comfortable chair in the corner, his backpack clutched to his chest like a shield. His breathing was slowly returning to normal, but his hands were still shaking slightly. The embarrassment of what had happened in English class was almost worse than the sensory overload that had caused it. "Would you like some water?" Mrs. Williams asked gently, not looking directly at him. She'd learned that direct eye contact could feel invasive when he was in this state. Ethan nodded, and she handed him a bottle of water from the small refrigerator in her office. The cool liquid helped soothe his throat, which felt raw from the effort of holding back tears. "That must have been really overwhelming," Mrs. Williams said after a few minutes of comfortable silence. "Group work can be particularly challenging." Ethan nodded again, grateful that she understood without him having to explain. Most people didn't realize that what looked like simple classroom activities could be incredibly complex for someone with autism. The social dynamics, the sensory input, the pressure to perform, it all combined to create a perfect storm of stress. "I made a fool of myself," Ethan said quietly, his voice hoarse. "You did nothing wrong," Mrs. Williams replied firmly. "You recognized that you were becoming overwhelmed and removed yourself from the situation. That's actually a very mature response." Ethan looked up at her surprised. He'd expected to be told that he needed to learn to cope better, to try harder to fit in. Instead, Mrs. Williams was treating his response as reasonable and adaptive. "But everyone saw me," Ethan said. "They'll think I'm even weirder now." "Some people might not understand," Mrs. Williams acknowledged, "but that's about their limitations, not yours. You have autism, Ethan. That's not something to be ashamed of, it's just a different way of processing the world." Ethan had heard this before, but it was hard to believe when he felt so fundamentally different from everyone around him. He watched his classmates navigate social situations with ease, saw how they could adapt to changes in routine without falling apart, observed how they seemed to instinctively understand unspoken rules that remained mysterious to him. "I don't want to be different," he said, the words coming out in a rush. "I want to be normal. I want to have friends and go to parties and not fall apart when someone moves the desks around." Mrs. Williams was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "I understand that feeling," she said finally. "But normal is just a setting on a washing machine. Everyone's brain works differently, and yours happens to work in a way that gives you incredible gifts. Your mathematical abilities, your attention to detail, your honesty, your loyalty. The challenge isn't changing who you are, it's finding ways to navigate a world that doesn't always accommodate those differences." That evening, Ethan sat in his room working on his astronomy homework, finding comfort in the orderly movement of planets and the predictable nature of celestial mechanics. His mother knocked softly on his door, 2 quick raps, then a pause, then one more, their agreed-upon signal so he wouldn't be startled by unexpected intrusions. "Come in," he called, not looking up from his textbook. His mother entered carrying 2 cups of hot chocolate, another evening ritual that had developed over the years. She set 1 cup on his desk and settled into the chair by his window, the same chair she'd occupied for countless bedtime stories when he was younger. "Mrs. Williams called," she said gently. "She told me about what happened in English class." Ethan's stomach clenched. He'd been dreading this conversation, expecting disappointment or frustration. Instead, his mother's voice was filled with concern and understanding. "I'm not in trouble?" he asked, finally looking up from his homework. "Oh, honey, no," his mother said, her voice soft. "You're not in trouble. You handled a difficult situation the best way you knew how. I'm actually proud of you for recognizing when you needed to leave." Ethan felt tears prick at his eyes. He'd been so afraid of disappointing his parents, of being seen as unable to cope with normal teenage life. His mother had been his advocate since his diagnosis at age 8, fighting for accommodations at school, researching therapies, and learning everything she could about autism. But sometimes he felt like such a burden, like his needs made everyone's life more complicated. "I saw Maya Chen's mother at the grocery store today," his mother continued. "She mentioned that Maya really enjoys talking with you at lunch. She said you're the first person who's ever listened to her thoughts about books without trying to change the subject." This surprised Ethan. He'd assumed that Maya was just being polite, that she talked to him out of pity rather than genuine interest. The idea that someone actually valued his perspective was foreign to him. "Maya's different too," his mother added. "Did you know she has dyslexia? She's incredibly bright, but she struggles with reading. She told her mother that watching you solve math problems so quickly helps her understand that intelligence comes in many different forms." Ethan considered this. He'd noticed that Maya sometimes asked for extra time on tests, that she occasionally used audiobooks instead of reading traditional texts. But he'd never connected these observations to a learning difference. In his mind, Maya seemed to navigate the social world with ease, appeared comfortable in situations that left him feeling lost and overwhelmed. "Everyone has challenges," his mother said, as if reading his thoughts. "Yours might be more visible in some ways, but that doesn't make them more significant than anyone else's struggles. The difference is that you're learning to understand and work with your brain, while some people spend their whole lives fighting against who they are." That night, as Ethan lay in bed staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling, he thought about what his mother had said. Maybe being different wasn't the problem. Maybe the problem was a world that expected everyone to be the same, that valued conformity over authenticity, that saw neurodivergence as something to be fixed rather than understood. The next day at lunch, Ethan found himself looking forward to seeing Maya for the first time since their initial conversation. When she approached his table, he felt the familiar anxiety, but it was tempered by something new. Curiosity about her perspective, about the struggles she faced that he'd never recognized. "How are you feeling?" Maya asked as she sat down, her voice gentle but not pitying. "I heard you had a tough time in English yesterday." Ethan was surprised by her directness. Most people either ignored difficult situations or asked vague questions like, "How are you?" without really wanting to know the answer. "Better," he said honestly. "Group work is hard for me." "I hate it too," Maya said, unwrapping her lunch. "All that talking at once, everyone trying to be heard. I can never process the information fast enough to contribute anything meaningful." Ethan looked up at her, intrigued. "But you always seem so confident in class discussions." Maya laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I spend hours preparing for every class, reading summaries and analysis online, because the actual books take me forever to get through. By the time I understand what we're supposed to be discussing, the conversation has moved on to something else." For the first time, Ethan realized that Maya's calm demeanor might be masking struggles similar to his own. While his challenges were more visible, his difficulty with social interaction, his need for routine, his sensory sensitivities, Maya was fighting her own battles with a brain that processed information differently. "People think I'm stupid," Maya continued, stirring her soup absent-mindedly. "I can see it in their faces when I ask for clarification or when I need extra time to understand something. But I'm not stupid. I just need information presented in a different way." "You're not stupid," Ethan said firmly, surprising himself with the conviction in his voice. "You understand things about people that I never will. You know how to be kind without making a big deal about it. That's intelligence too." Maya smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her. "Thanks, and you're not weird, by the way. Tyler Henderson is an idiot who thinks being cruel makes him interesting. You're just different, in a good way." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both processing this new level of understanding between them. Ethan found himself relaxing in a way he rarely did around his peers, feeling for the first time that he didn't need to pretend to be someone else. "Do you want to work on our English homework together?" Maya asked as they finished eating. "I could use help with the analysis questions, and maybe you could practice explaining your ideas out loud." Mrs. Williams said that might help with the group work. Ethan considered this. The idea of academic collaboration was appealing, but he was nervous about his ability to articulate his thoughts coherently. Still, something about Maya's approach felt safe, non-judgmental. "Okay," he said, "but can we work in the library? It's quieter there." "Perfect," Maya said. "I focus better in quiet spaces too." As they gathered their things and headed toward the library, Ethan felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. The possibility of genuine friendship built on mutual understanding rather than pity or obligation. Over the following weeks, Ethan and Maya developed a routine of studying together in the library during lunch and after school. What started as mutual academic support gradually evolved into something deeper, a friendship based on genuine understanding and acceptance of each other's differences. Ethan found that he could explain complex mathematical concepts to Maya in ways that made sense to her, breaking down problems into smaller, more manageable pieces. In return, Maya helped him understand the social dynamics of their classes, explaining unspoken rules and helping him prepare for group activities. The key to Mrs. Patterson's class, Maya explained one afternoon as they worked on their latest English assignment, is that she wants to see that you understand the themes, not just the plot. She's less interested in the right answer than in your thought process. This revelation was transformative for Ethan. He'd been so focused on finding correct answers that he'd missed the point of literary analysis entirely. With Maya's help, he began to see that English class wasn't about memorizing facts. It was about interpretation, about understanding different perspectives, about recognizing that there could be multiple valid ways of seeing the same situation. "You're actually really good at this," Maya said as she read over his analysis of a poem they'd been assigned. "You notice details that other people miss. Look at how you connected the imagery in the first stanza to the theme of isolation. I never would have seen that." Ethan felt a flush of pride. For so long, he'd thought of his attention to detail as a liability, something that made him obsess over things that didn't matter. But Maya was showing him that the same trait that made him notice when someone moved his pencil could also help him understand literature in unique ways. Their friendship didn't go unnoticed by their classmates. Some students seemed genuinely curious about their partnership, while others, like Tyler Henderson, viewed it with suspicion. "Look at that," Tyler said loudly one day as Ethan and Maya entered the library together. The weird kid found someone just as weird as him. Maya stopped walking and turned to face Tyler, her expression calm but determined. "Actually, Tyler, we're working on the same assignment you're supposed to be doing. Maybe if you spent less time commenting on other people and more time on your own work, you wouldn't be failing English." Tyler's face reddened, but he didn't have a comeback. Several other students had overheard the exchange, and a few were nodding in agreement with Maya's assessment. Ethan felt a surge of gratitude for his friend's willingness to stand up for him, but also a growing sense of his own worth. Maybe he wasn't the problem. Maybe Tyler's cruelty said more about Tyler than it did about him. As the semester progressed, Ethan found himself participating more in class discussions. It wasn't easy. His voice still shook when he spoke up, and he still preferred written assignments to oral presentations. But with Maya's encouragement and Mrs. Williams' support, he began to find his voice. "Ethan makes an excellent point about the symbolism," Mrs. Patterson said during one class discussion. "I hadn't considered that interpretation before. Can you expand on that idea?" The request would have terrified Ethan a few months earlier, but now he felt a quiet confidence in his ability to contribute something valuable to the conversation. He took a deep breath and began to explain his thoughts, feeling the satisfaction of sharing his unique perspective with others. Spring arrived with a burst of color that made Ethan's sensory-sensitive world both more beautiful and more overwhelming. The increased sunlight streaming through classroom windows required him to adjust his seating preferences, and the sounds of outdoor activities during lunch meant he and Maya had to find new quiet spaces to study. But these changes, which would have derailed him completely a year earlier, now felt manageable. He was learning to advocate for himself, to communicate his needs clearly, and to work with his differences rather than against them. "I got accepted to the summer math program at the university," Ethan told Maya one afternoon as they worked on their final English project together. "I almost didn't apply because I was afraid of being around all those new people." "That's amazing," Maya said, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "You're going to be incredible there, all those people who love math as much as you do." Ethan smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine. 6 months ago, he wouldn't have believed that anyone could understand his passion for mathematics, let alone celebrate it. Now he was beginning to see that his intense interests weren't something to be hidden or apologized for. They were gifts to be shared with people who could appreciate them. "I'm nervous," he admitted, "but Mrs. Williams helped me contact the program coordinator. They have experience with autistic students, and they're willing to make accommodations if I need them." Maya nodded thoughtfully. "You know what I realized? Asking for help isn't a sign of weakness. It's just being smart about what you need to succeed." Their final English project was a presentation about overcoming challenges, and they had chosen to focus on the theme of neurodiversity. Standing in front of their classmates, Ethan felt the familiar flutter of anxiety, but it was tempered by a deep sense of purpose. "Autism isn't something wrong with me. he said, his voice clearer and stronger than it had ever been in a classroom setting. It's just a different way of experiencing the world. The challenges I face aren't because autism is bad, they're because the world is designed for neurotypical brains. Maya picked up where he left off, explaining her own experiences with dyslexia and how she'd learned to work with her brain rather than against it. Together, they painted a picture of a world where differences were celebrated rather than stigmatized, where accommodation was seen as a reasonable adjustment rather than special treatment. When they finished, the classroom was unusually quiet. Then, slowly, students began to ask questions. Not mocking or dismissive questions, but genuine inquiries about their experiences, their perspectives, their advice for understanding neurodivergent peers. "I never knew," said Jessica, the girl who usually had all the answers. "I just thought, I don't know what I thought. Thank you for helping me understand." After class, as Ethan packed up his materials, he felt a profound sense of completion. Not because his journey was over, but because he'd finally understood something fundamental about himself and his place in the world. He wasn't broken. He didn't need to be fixed. He was different, and that difference was valuable. Tyler Henderson approached him as he was leaving the classroom, his usual smirk replaced by something that might have been embarrassment. "Hey," Tyler said awkwardly. I never really thought about it that way. I'm sorry about, the things I said." Ethan looked at Tyler for a long moment, seeing past the bravado to the insecurity underneath. "It's okay," he said quietly. "We all say things we don't mean sometimes." As Ethan walked out of the school building that afternoon, he thought about the question that had haunted him for so long. Why am I different? Now he understood that it was the wrong question. The real question was, how can I use my differences to make the world a better place? His phone buzzed with a text from Maya. "Proud of you today. Want to celebrate with ice cream?" Ethan smiled and typed back, "Yes. But can we go to the quiet place with the blue chairs?" Her response came immediately. "Of course. I wouldn't want to go anywhere else." Walking toward the ice cream shop, Ethan felt the spring breeze on his face and heard the distant sound of children playing. The world was still full of overwhelming stimuli, social complexities, and unexpected changes. But now he had something he'd never had before, the knowledge that being different wasn't a burden to bear, but a gift to share. He was autistic, he was different, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. Next day at lunch, Ethan found himself looking forward to seeing